Hello, folks. I'm Jim McKenzie for NewHampshireTrackandField.com and NewHampshireCrossCountry.com, brought to you by Runner's Alley. We're here with New Hampshire's own legends. Like Boston has Larry Legend, we have Larry Martin, our own legend of cross-country and track and field. He served over 50 years working with high schools and middle schools to make us one of the prize states in the United States of America as far as it goes with cross-country and coaching in this state. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's just start off with your coaching. Where did you start out, Larry?
All right, I 1970, when I graduated from UNH, I was the assistant coach at UNH for several years, and while I was teaching at Raymond High School. It's an interesting story. I took the job at Raymond because they were on double sessions at the time, which meant high school went in the morning from 7 to 12, and the middle school went in the afternoon. So I was getting done about 12:30 at Raymond, so then I could go in and I could coach at UNH. I was coaching the distance kids at UNH back then. Then while I was at Raymond, I was introduced to there was a high school program going on, the New Hampshire Indoor Track League at UNH. And so Raymond didn't have track, but I had a couple kids that were interested in track. So they would go in with me a couple days a week to just run on the indoor track while I was coaching. And so it started with a couple kids, and then a couple more wanted to do it. But back then I had an old Chevy Biscayne, and I could fit 4 kids in it. So I was limited to a group of 4 kids. So we joined the Indoor Track League as a member school, except the school didn't know we were doing it because they didn't have indoor track. But I had 4 kids, so I picked the right 4 so I could have a relay team, and each of the kids would run an individual event. And the first year that we went in, we were like 4th or 5th in class. They only had 2 classes back then, L and I. We were in class I, and we placed, I don't remember, 4th or 5th in the state meet. And the next day it was in the Manchester Union Leader. It was like this big deal thing because 4 kids from Raymond went in and did this. The next day I went to the drugstore in Raymond to pick something up, and Frank Case, who was the druggist, was also the chairman of the school board. And he was a little shocked to find out that Raymond had placed 4th or 5th in the state meet because he didn't think they had a team, which of course we didn't. But his attitude was, you're doing something good with the kids, maybe we ought to have a team. So that's how I started coaching. Just a bunch of pickup kids. Some of the names you'll probably remember, Jimmy, some of those first kids. Dave Jelinas, Jamie Purington, Jimmy Crummy. Don't remember who the 4. Really, I had 3 good kids, but I needed a 4th for a relay, so we picked someone out so we could run a relay. But that year, each kid ran one individual event, and we ran a relay, and every one of them was like 1st or 2nd.
And some of those teams that you had in the Raymond years were just legendary teams.
Yeah.
You were putting the hurt on a lot of bigger teams back then. I mean, you guys probably. Who was your big rival back then?
We didn't really have one. We wanted to go against all the big people. We loved it when we could beat a Portsmouth and a Salem and Central and Memorial, because there weren't anyone our size. I mean, I used to only have like 10 or 12 kids out, but they were always pretty good. In fact, I don't remember, one year we were 2nd in the, they didn't technically have a Class I then. There was only one state meet, but the league would run an I meet the week before the state meets, and so that was sort of like an unofficial one. But when they only had the one state meet, we were 2nd one year to Salem in the all-state meet. And we had school of Raymond had like 350 kids in the whole school. But again, I didn't have a lot of kids, but I had good kids.
So who was your very first state champion?
Jamie Purington.
And we know the story of him.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, back then, you could only run, if you're running a distance event, you could only run one event. From the 600 up, you could run one distance event and one relay. And and then we kept battle notes. Those are the first years we did battle notes, a handwritten list of the kids. So in Purington's senior year, each week I ran him in a different event, and he was tops in the battle notes from everything from the 600 up, 600,000 mile and 2 mile. He was the top one, and he only ran each one of them once. But every time he ran it, he was beat any time that was there. Probably one of the toughest kids I've ever coached.
And I got the pleasure to know his grandmother. His mother and father. They were my neighbors when I moved to Deerfield, and the stories they tell. And then I remember looking through and seeing the trophy box, and then they spoke highly of you and made that connection. And you still stayed in contact with them right to the very end. And I thought that was, quite admirable. Who was your first girl that?
Nadine McDonald. Back
high, right?
when I was, what was that?
That was the junior high.
Yeah, back when I first started coaching, there was no such thing as girls cross country. But we started it in the middle 70s in New Hampshire. And Jeff Johnson, who was at Exeter, you've probably heard of him, and myself at Raymond, we were instrumental in getting it started. So I was running the middle school state meet at Raymond back then it had like 8 schools in it. But and then we added the girls in like the second or third year we had it. I've got all those dates, but I don't have them here. And that year when Nadine was in 8th grade, they ran the first all-state meet for girls. She was second as an 8th grader in the all-state meet. Well, there was only one big division at that point, but she was second.
And Nadine and Jamie were cousins, I believe?
Cousins, yeah.
Right. So you spent, roughly 8 years, 9 years at...
I got there in 1970, and I left after the spring of 79.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was all... I never even applied to Londonderry. Back... When I first got involved with the NHIA, my principal at Raymond was John Callahan, who was very big in the NHIA. He was like chairman of the basketball committee. And I went bitching to him a couple times about how I didn't like some of the things they were doing with track. So he said, well, if you don't like what's going on, you ought to be on the committee. I said, well, that's easy to say. He said, well, I'll get you on. So he got me on the track committee. Well, back then, the NHIA track committee was about 10 people, but it was for cross-country, indoor track, and spring track, and girls and boys, even though there were no girls in cross-country, just in track. So there's one big committee. So I was on that committee back then, and the chairman of that committee happened to be Ed Thibodeau, who became the principal of Londonderry High School. So when they were building Londonderry High School, Londonderry hired Thibodeau to be principal the year before the school opened. His job was to create a high school out of nothing. And not the building, but, the staff and everything. So after one of our committee meetings, he said, I want you to come to Londonderry. So I sort of laughed. And before he said, well, I want you to teach math, because he knew he was a science person at Salem. He was chairman of the science department, and he knew I was also a really good teacher. He said, I want you to come and start the track. And he said, you'll be perfect for it, because Londonderry won't have a track, and you've coached for 8 years at Raymond without a track, so you know how to do it. So he sort of recruited me for the job. And I was one of the 8 people that they announced as the core group that was going to open Londonderry High School.
Wow. So then at Londonderry, you started to build the real deal.
Well, we started with nothing. Literally, it was probably close to 10 years we didn't have a track. We ran around the school. I created stuff. We had a pole vault area. I remember one year we had this area where we pole vaulted and long jump. Well, that winter, for some reason, the plow company went and plowed all the snow from all over the roads around the school, and they put it on top of where our long jump, triple jump, and pole. And literally, it didn't melt until May. And so the only area we had that year we couldn't use. It was really funny because out behind Londonderry High School, we had lanes on the road. We had lanes painted. I had the custodians paint lanes out. So we had 8 lanes. I mean, buses would come in for other things. They'd, why do you have all these lanes on your road? But that's where we ran. We had a half-mile loop going around the high school on the roads that we did our workouts on.
So when you were building your teams in Londonderry, when you're building from the ground up, how difficult was it to get the athletes out? Was it hard? Or did you have to do some, how did you recruit your team, basically?
Okay, here's a great story. My first season at Londonderry, coaching cross country. Here I am coming from Raymond. We had won like 4 of the last 5 state meets in Class A, and we just won the year before. So all these state championships, and I'm all excited about going. And they put an announcement in the Dairy News that Larry Martin was coming from Raymond, is going to be the new coach. In the first meeting back then, I think it was like always around August 15th to 16th, whatever that Monday was, you start practice. So we announced practice, and I had one kid show up. His name was David. One kid showed up, and we ran. I was in really good shape back then too. I was running really well, so I ran with him, and he quit. So literally the next day, I had no kids on the team. So I didn't have, and there was no way of getting in touch. And no one knew me, and we hadn't even started school yet. So literally when school started, then I had to start getting kids out. And Rich Nagy, remember, he was in the math department with me. And Bill Newcomb, he was the athletic director. And we just talked to kids, and I would get kids out, 1 or 2 at a time. And if I got 3 out, maybe 1 or 2 would stick with it. By the end of the year, I had like 8 kids total that made it through the year. We weren't very good. But I had one kid who showed promise. His name was Bobby Godin. Oh, yeah. Oh my God. He was only a sophomore. But he was pretty good. And another kid, his best friend was Kevin Cooper. So they were both pretty, this was in 79. This was probably 80, I think. And they were both pretty good. So I figured I got a great story about the first, with coaching, talking to them about team running, how important it is. You help each other out, and, you get in a little group. And we talked about it, and the concept to me seemed so easy, and my Raymond kids always did it. So we had our very first meet. We were in against Manchester West, up on the west side. Not at Dairyfield Park. It was at this hockey arena. And so you started on this one, you ran out into the woods, and after about a mile, you came back on this railroad bed. And so I'm there with the coach, and all of a sudden, all these West kids come out. And behind all the West kids, and back that, I maybe had 5 or 6 kids. That's the very beginning of the season. There are my 5 or 6 kids all running together. They're doing team running. They had no clue what I was talking about. So I yelled at them, and then a couple of them, the good ones, moved their way up. But they thought team running meant we have to run as a team. We're going to all stay together, even if we are behind all the other guys in the other team. So anyway, Bobby was pretty good. And his senior year, we won the first state championship in the history of Londonderry High School. It was 1983. And that was...
No, it'd have to be before that, because my senior year was 82, and Bob was, I think, a year ahead of me, and Dan was a year behind me.
So would that have been 80?
So I think maybe 81, because you guys would have been Class I.
81? Was it 81?
Yeah, I believe so.
I think it was 81. Tim picked on me about that, like championship. I don't really...
Yeah, they all start to come together.
I mean, when they did the track dedication, someone put together all that stuff, but once you get onto another team, the old team's gone, But anyway, that year, the year we won, we won Class I, and we were 3rd in New England. But back then, though, New England was only 3 states. It was Vermont, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. And we were 3rd in the New England. However, I only had 9 kids total on the team, okay? And only 6 of those kids could run under 22 minutes at Dairyfield.
Oh, wow.
And so when we went to big meets, I only ran 6. And of course, I had parents, oh, you can't do that. I was, yes, I can. And I did it because I'm not going to embarrass a kid. I'm not going to have a kid. But I had 5 kids that were good. 5. So any meet that we had all 5, we lost like 2 or 3 regular season meets because I might have only had 3 or 4 of those 5. But when I had all 5, we were really good. And so in Class I had all 5, we won. And then I don't remember the meet of champions. The meet of champions back then didn't used to mean a lot to me. Getting to the New Englands was the main thing. Then in the New Englands we were 3rd. But my 5th kid was like in the middle 17s. Back then that was real fast at Dairyfield, not anymore. But then my 6th kid was like 19s. And like I said, my 7th was like 23. So they said, well, yeah, but whatever, the 2 kids drop out. Well, if 2 kids drop out, I don't want to score. I don't want to score with a kid that's going to be 23 minutes in the New Englands. So that was 80, I think you're right. That was 81 because Danny was only a sophomore. Bobby was a senior.
Right.
Right. So
was Dan your first state champion at Londonderry as far as cross country goes?
Yes. Well, did Bob? No, Bob never won anything. That was an his senior year. How about that? This is great. His senior year, he was 2nd in Class I. This is all, I might not be totally, someone will probably come back and say that was wrong. It might be, but he was runner-up in Class I, runner-up in the Meet of Champions, and the 2nd New Hampshire kid in the New Englands, okay?
Oh, wow.
But every kid that beat him was a different kid. You know, in other words, one of them was a kid from Hanover one time, a kid from Concord another. So he lost to a New Hampshire kid 3 times in a row, but no one beat him twice.
Right.
You see what I mean? So he was the best runner in New Hampshire. I mean, because he beat everybody more times than they beat him. But he never won anything. But he led us to a championship.
I mean, he was smooth. Dan was more of a power runner. But,
Bobby Gordon wasn't exactly a student. Keeping him out was sometimes the hardest part. And so by spring, he would have been really good in spring. But he ran into a problem. He was mowing his lawn and something got stuck underneath. He stuck his hand underneath the lawnmower, but then it started up again and chopped his hand all up. So he didn't have a very good spring. Then Danny, he was a sophomore that year. And then he won everything the next his senior year.
Right. I remember having the battle with Danny at Portsmouth, and I said, I got to get a big lead. He's one kid I couldn't outkick. I had a huge lead, and we come through that muddy area. Off goes the shoe, off goes the 30-yard lead, and off goes Danny, blows by me.
You know something? Here's a workout that we used to do see, Danny hated cross country. He absolutely hated running long. He liked the mile. He wanted to run short. So I sort of tricked him in cross country. In cross country, I told him he's really only running a mile.
Yeah.
The first 2 was his warm up, and then we'd run a mile. And we would go to Dairyfield. Remember, I was in really good shape then. Back then, I could even beat him. Back then, I mean, when I was 35, I ran a 4:35 mile. When I was 40, I ran 9:48 2-mile. I was 3rd in the national championships for masters. So I was in really good shape. So I used to go with him at Dairyfield and we'd do a workout. And I would run the first mile with him, and then he'd run the second mile. And I'd meet him at the 2-mile point, and I'd run in with him from there for the last mile. And the object was to beat me, because all we were running was the last mile. The first 2 didn't really. I said, all your job is when you run, if you're running against Jimmy McKenzie, you just stay with him, because you know you're going to beat him at the end, right? I mean, that's really was the plan, because he was so fast. You just stay with him. Once you get down the hill, how hard could it be? You know, you just stay with these guys and kick in on them.
And he went on to win the MOCs, and you guys went on to win a lot of championships.
Yeah. He went to Milrose. He went to Milrose one year. He went to the Milrose games one year.
And ran, what, a 4:17?
be a New Hampshire kid in the Millrose Mile in New York City's pretty big.
Right. Yeah, I remember when he did that. Ran a 4:17, I believe.
Yep. You know what he also did to get in? Oh boy, no, it was Mortimer. I sometimes get them mixed up. I'll tell you that one later.
Yeah.